So my name is James McBreen. I'm Program Manager at the IUCN Centre for Conservation Action, and I am also managing the innovation facility from IUCN side. All of the slides that you'll see today in today's presentation will be made available, and all the questions will be answered in the Q&A, which is on the innovation facility website. Hopefully many of you have already accessed the website. There you'll find all the documents, the tender documents, and the Q&A from the previous information session. It may have taken us somewhat longer than we had anticipated to respond to the previous questions, just because of the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. But all of the questions have now been answered, and they can all be found on the website in case you are still looking for further clarification on any of the points raised previously. So just a quick recap. I mean, obviously, I don't know how many of you connected today were participating in the first information session. So I'll just give a quick 3-minute overview of what the innovation facility is, just to make sure everyone who is new to this call will understand where we are and where we're going, our direction of travel together. So the mission of the facility is to address critical funding gaps by supporting innovative nature-based carbon projects. There's 4 key objectives and key themes, principally delivering nature-positive impacts, so making measurable contribution to biodiversity, by leveraging the voluntary carbon market. There's been some very interesting developments, especially last year around VCM, especially the outcomes of Article 6 in UNFCCC, carbon components of the project. And then advancing social inclusion, benefit sharing, gender equality. And of course, the final 4th pillar of the innovation facility is the innovation. As the name suggests, we're really looking for opportunities to scale and accelerate actions that are conducive to improving the status of species, of ecosystems, increasing carbon sequestration storage, and of course, making sure that all of these actions that are being developed at the site level are inclusive, they're gender responsive, and that there are robust benefit sharing mechanisms in place to ensure equity and justness in any of these actions. Some of the basics. This is a €9 million fund from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, via KfW Development Bank. The funding amount for each of the sub-projects, that would be the quantity, the budget available for each of the grants, would be between €750,000 to €1.5 million per project. There's an anticipated 6 projects altogether. Duration of the projects would be up to 24 months, but no later than the end of June 2027. That is a hard stop, just to be clear. And the facility is managed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, of which I am and the rest of the team are part. So 4 key outcomes are expected during the implementation period of this phase 1 of the innovation facility. So critically, it's mobilization of private finance. We know there's funding out there. It's about trying to leverage these resources from the private sector that are channeled into activities that are improving the state of species, ecosystems, and also social inclusion. At the scale is necessary to respond to the challenges that we're facing as a global society and natural world now. Project validation and registration. So within the 2-year, up to 2-year, 24-month period of the grant, the projects will be expected to reach project validation and registration, the first step of certification. Improve livelihoods, so measurably improving livelihoods, making sure we have all the systems in place to ensure that the distribution of benefits are equitable and just, and of course ensuring environmental social risk mitigation through a robust environmental and social management system and the associated safeguard tools and instruments associated with it. So in terms of the application process and the timeline, this is where we are now. So on the 11th of December, we launched the global launch for the Call for Concepts. on the 17th of December last year. We had our first information session. Yesterday, many of you, if you're very astute and you've been following it closely, you will have seen that the ICE Grants portal went live. And today, 16th of January 2025, we have our second information session. In approximately 1 month, the concept notes the deadline for concept note submission is on the 13th of February. That's at 5 p.m. Central European time. And then on the 28th of March, approximately 6 weeks after submission of the concept notes, all applicants will be informed, and the shortlisted applicants will be invited to develop a full project proposal. So that's just a quick 3 or 4 minute summary overview of where we are so far for anyone that did not join information session 1. But now just to the focus of today's second information session. It's really a deep dive into the concept note. You will have seen the concept note. It's annexed, annex number 2 to the guidelines for applicants, also found on the Innovation Facility website. It's broken down into these principal 6 sections. First section is on project proponents and participants. Second section on project description and eligibility, looking at the description of the project, eligibility criteria, and the status and the timeline of any existing activities under the project at the project site. And the third section, the focus of the innovation facility, as we just looked at, those 4 key pillars of biodiversity, carbon, social, and innovation. Fourth section is on grant budget and the project financing. Critically, the grant budget being that which you are applying for as a grantee or as an applicant, and the project financing of the carbon project which is being proposed. And the fifth section is environmental and social safeguards. And the final, but no less important, is the due diligence and financial capacity of each of the lead organizations applying for the innovation facility. Now, I will be sharing some of the first 2 and a bit sections, and then some of the other colleagues, part of the innovation facility team, and from Climate Focus, who have been supporting us with the development of the carbon component of the innovation facility and the ideation of the guidelines for participants as well. So section A, it's really fairly self-explanatory. I won't spend too much time going through this because it's all should be very clear in the both in the guidelines, which is where you will need to consult for any additional context and any additional information you're looking for. But in the concept note, which is Annex 2 to the guidelines for participants, section A is effectively including your name, details of the proponent. And the supporting documentation 1, this is highlighted in blue just to make sure that everyone is aware that when you see this supporting documentation, it means that you have to submit. This is a requirement to be submitted as part of the application on the ICE Grants portal as well. So whenever you see these little blue highlights, please do take note that these are supporting documentation which do need to be submitted. And in this case, we're looking at the articles or registration or statutes or other relevant founding documents of the project proponent. The project proponent lead contact information, of course, important to know where you are, who you are, and how we can get in touch. Experience and track record of the proponent, so describing any relevant experience on the track record specific to the proposed project activities and the scope of work, and the capacity of the lead project proponent to undertake implementation of the proposed activities within that timeline, so up to the 30th of June, 2027. Continuing section A, talking about consortium, wherever applicable. If there is a consortium of partners, then the names and details of each of these partners will need to be included. And in the case of a consortium, the lead organization, the lead proponent will need to submit a representation letter, which effectively says that the consortium partners agree that this is the consortium lead and that they are represented by that lead proponent in all effectiveness of the grant and its activities. And again, including the experience and track record of the consortium partners, so exactly the same for the lead proponent. Wherever a consortium a situation arises, then we'll be looking for the relevant experience, track records and capacity of the consortium to implement and deliver high quality activities and results within the funding timeline. And continuation, so ownership of the project site. So do you, as a project proponent, own the land? Do you have the right to manage and control it? If you do not, then you'd have to describe how you would obtain those rights. Given that the project concept note deadline is the 13th of February, then the shortlisted candidates would be invited on the 28th of March to submit their full project proposals. We'd be looking really to make sure that this ownership of this project site is, by all accounts and purposes, clear, and you have the documentation to support that. No, the carbon rights. Please here confirm ownership, outlining any agreements to secure title to carbon assets arising from the proposed project. In additional actors and roles, so please here just describe other project participants, any relevant institutions, state and non-state actors and subcontractors involved in the proposed project. That means they wouldn't be part of they would not be considered consortium partners per se, but they would be involved in the success and ensuring the success of the project which is being proposed. So section B, the second section of the concept note template, is about the project description and eligibility. So let's start with the first bit. So what's the name of the proposed project? How do we refer to the project which is being proposed? Which countries is the project or country or countries located in? And then list the official development assistance countries in which the project is implemented. And you'll find that the ODA countries are the OECD list is part of the eligibility criteria. If the country being proposed is not on the ODA list of countries, then it is not eligible. Executive summary, so provide here a summary of the project being proposed and outlining the activities and the objectives pursued both during the grant funding period, that's critical, during the up to 30th of June 2027, and the project lifetime. So looking at a fairly high level on the second part, looking at how what the expectations are for you as a project proponent beyond the life of the grant funding period into the end of the project lifetime, which could be 20, 30, 40, 50, etc. years. So again, project area. So here you'd need to upload shapefiles of the project area and then looking at the characteristics of the site. This is a supporting documentation 3, you'll see it highlighted in blue. Please take note of that. And then long-term sustainability of the project, so describing how the positive outcomes of the project can be ensured beyond the project lifetime. And this really is about trying to identify projects which are benefiting from this initial kind of ramp-up finance from the innovation facility, and that then can do fantastic things moving forward. And there is this, a robust governance structure in place, great partnerships, networks within and around the site with relevant stakeholders to ensure that sustainability of the long term as well of the project activities. Okay, so now to the eligibility criteria. So just quickly to go through these, this is all very clearly expanded upon in the guidelines for applicants as well. If you have not yet already consulted it, please do so. In the first project category, so there are 3 project categories. We anticipate financing 2 projects from each of the categories. So we would expect to have 2 projects from the forest category, 2 projects from the inland wetlands, peatlands, and 2 projects from the coastal wetlands, mangroves, salt marshes, seagrass, kelp forests, etc. The location in or near a KBA, again, this will be determined, you will identify as a project proponent whether the site is located in, or if it's not in a KBA, then you'll be able to specify its location, its proximity to a KBA. And we will obviously look at that based on the shapefile that you submit as well as your supported documentation. No? And compare that to the KBA database. The land use history of the project site, so no land use change in the past 10 years, and you will need to upload land use change maps covering the minimum of the last 10 years to support that. And then there are clearly excluded activities, and you need to confirm the alignment of the activities that are being proposed to make sure that they do not appear on the exclusion list, which is in chapter 2.2.4 in the guidelines for applicants. So in terms of project status and timeline, now where there are examples of existing activities of a project, of course, you will see by the design of the concept note and the detail which is included in the guidelines for applicants, that this is not really targeting very initial stage projects. This is really targeting fairly mature projects that have a pretty well established, let's say, track record of developing some important data analysis networks, structures in place that will allow within that 2-year grant funding window to deliver what is expected of those 4 key outcomes under the innovation facility. So here you'll be describing the status of the project and providing a summary of outstanding steps. That means that if you have already existing activities at your project site, what are those activities and what steps do you anticipate would need to be completed, and how this ramp-up finance is going to help get over those final steps. And here you'll need to upload any relevant studies and assessments, including feasibility studies, baseline studies and agreements that are in place with partners, authorities in and around that project site. Include an indicative timeline for the grant funding period. So the main steps until validation of registration and of the implementation activities. Of course, this is on the assumption that we would be working, probably looking at between July and August 2025 to begin implementation of these grantee projects until the end of June 2027. So it's estimated start date and lifetime of the project. This refers to the carbon project more broadly. It's important to highlight that you'll need to specify the estimated start date and lifetime of the carbon project as well. So in terms of the third section C, which is the focus of the innovation facility, so we talked about biodiversity, carbon, social inclusion and innovation. In terms of the first focus area, being biodiversity, we've seen a number of exchanges already in the Q&A so far around the STAR IBAT report. The STAR you need to enter an estimated STAR value and provide preliminary assessments of threats to biodiversity. Now, the supporting documentation 6, the IBAT STAR report, is a requirement, as you'll see highlighted in blue, but this is something that IUCN can support you with if you do not already have access and an account on IBAT and you're unable to develop a STAR report yourselves as project proponents, then please do get in touch with the innovation facility at iucn.org email address. We can support you developing that. All we would need is the lat long of each of the project locations, and we can develop the STAR report on your behalf, because otherwise there is a potential cost that would apply, and we obviously want to avoid proponents having to, invest any of the resources you currently manage for developing a report that we are requiring for this innovation facility concept note submission. Biodiversity management plan. So provide an overview of a management plan to reduce biodiversity threats. Now, this is, of course, linked to any threats which are identified by you, and indeed any of the threats which are identified through the STAR report itself. And then a biodiversity monitoring plan. Please provide an overview of monitoring plan that you have in place. I mean, if you're looking at the carbon project and lifetime of those projects, you want to see some pretty important and significant biodiversity monitoring to ensure improvement status of species and of the ecosystem themselves. And the supporting documentation number 7, data demonstrating the suitability of biodiversity monitoring system. You'll see here there's a little optional tag. So it's supporting documentation, but if you do not have any data to demonstrate suitability of biodiversity monitoring system being proposed, then you would not need to upload that in this case. And this is the species threat abatement restoration metric. So that's the star. And this is what allows quantification of potential contributions that species threat abatement and restoration activities offer towards reducing extinction risk across the world. And it's being used increasingly and with great effect as well so far. For now, I would like to invite on the next focus on carbon, I'll invite Simon Koenig from Climate Focus to please share the next few slides. Thanks, Simon. And I can flick through the slides on your behalf if you want, Simon.
Yeah, I was just going to say I don't have the slide deck up, so thanks for that. If you could go to the next slide, I'll run quickly through the content of the concept note as far as carbon is concerned. And as James mentioned, there are more detailed descriptions in the templates, of course, as most of you would have seen already, but this is just a brief overview of what needs to be covered regarding carbon. So the first item here is a status of the carbon component. So in addition to the status of the project in general, this is really the status of the carbon quantification. So for you to indicate if you've already done GHG estimates, developed a baseline, MRV systems, any inventories, but also any existing project activities. So for example, if you've already planted a certain number of hectares, that would be indicated here. Then the estimated timeline till project registration. This is quite important because, as James mentioned, the idea is that you would achieve validation within the grant period of roughly 2 years. So we'd like to see a little bit how you plan to get there, what the different steps are, what's missing. And of course, that will also feed into the budget that we'll talk a little bit further down the line here. Then high-level indication of GHG emissions and carbon pools. This, really can be a general description because we do have a sheet that we can run through here a little bit where you provide a little bit more details, but this is for you to indicate, are we talking mostly about above ground biomass? Are we talking about soil carbon? So this is a description and then an indication of the carbon standard and the methodology that you're targeting. Should also be pretty self-explanatory. Then next slide. Yeah, then as I think most of you will be familiar with, we'd be looking for description of the baseline scenario. So what would happen if this project was not implemented? Quite important, of course, to determine additional carbon removals that would happen as a result of this project. Then we have a discussion of additionality. So here we're looking for a description of barriers, both financial and otherwise, that would prevent these project activities from being implemented in the absence of carbon finance. And also a discussion of regulatory surplus. So whether the activity that you are proposing is mandated or required by law. So as an example, typically in most countries, you'd see some requirements around maintenance of buffers around water sources. In many cases, those might have been deforested in the past, but there is a requirement to actually reforest or restore these areas technically, but in practice, often these requirements are not enforced. So here we're really looking at whether any of the activities are actually required by law, which may be an issue from an additionality perspective, unless this really is chronically not enforced and there is no finance otherwise available. And then, yeah, a description of the project scenario, really sort of a detailed description of the different types of activities that you're planning to implement. Next slide. Yeah, permanence. You're welcome to provide a description here. There is no requirement to use at this stage the permanence or non-permanence tools that might be available under different standards. Of course, you're welcome to use those under, for example, VCS or gold standard and submit those as well, but it's not required. Basically, what we're looking for here is a clear analysis of any risks, both natural and human related, that that could lead to non-permanence of the carbon stocks in the future, and then match to that any mitigation measures that you're putting in place to prevent those risks from materializing and actually leading to any reversals in the future. And then a leakage assessment as well. There's a couple of different categories for leakage, and we'd be looking at an assessment of any factors that might drive leakage and how those will be mitigated. Next slide. So we do have a GHG emissions and removal calculation sheet that we can quickly run through. The purpose here is really to make sure that this gets done in a structured way and allows the team from IUCN to assess projects in a structured way. If you have additional data or you have, spreadsheets, models, whatever it might be that you've used already to estimate GHG emissions and removals, you're welcome to share those. It's not required, but even let's say if you have additional information, you're still required to fill in the calculation spreadsheet. So that is standard, and yeah, we can run quickly through the structure. Again, we've designed it so it should be fairly self-explanatory, but it might be helpful to quickly run through it. James, I think you can go to the next slide, which at least has one example, but maybe it's easy if I share my screen here. So there's a number of tabs down here. The first one is an instructions tab. Encourage you to take a good look at this. There are some cells in here that are locked. It's clearly indicated where you're supposed to be putting in inputs. So that's the light blue cells, and then the gray cells you're not able to change. Orange tabs generally have the instructions, and here you have a description of the different tabs, but they're all organized in sequence. Then a high-level description of the project, that matches some of the information that you've previously provided in the templates. Here we're really trying to understand a little bit more in detail on what climate zone these are located, as well, again, detailing the crediting period for the project. And then we have this tab on project activities, which is really quite important because it provides a clear overview of the types of activities that you are planning to implement in different types of lands. So this matrix here allows you to define what's been referred to here as a strata. So the types of activities you implement in. So for example, here this is an example that of course you're expected to change. You're planning to do assisted natural regeneration on degraded grassland, and that is going to lead after implementation to natural forest without harvesting and sort of trying to mimic the type of ecosystem that may have been on the land previously. But you're also, in this case, looking at plantations. So it's the same starting condition, but in the baseline. And so it's currently degraded grassland, and you're also expecting it to remain as such in the absence of carbon financing. But then you're actually planting forest with potentially some limited harvesting, which potentially might be, for example, relevant for fuel wood or timber, and generate additional income in addition to carbon. So if you only have one particular project intervention on one particular type of land, and you only be looking at one category here, but there is room for you to include additional ones, and it's important to really segment them out quite clearly, because you're then required to estimate, to insert values that allow for the estimation of carbon removals for these different scenarios, because of course they will be different depending on whether you're looking at restoration of natural forest, planted forest, or let's say you have some wetland areas, then different initial carbon stocks, and also removal values would apply. Then, well, I should mention also that this is tied to the finance sheet. So in the finance sheet, you have references to strata. So different costs will likely apply to different types of project interventions. So this is really a key sheet to start with. And then here there is a second table on scaling. So this is basically for you to put in what you're expecting to implement over time. So you would mirror here the kind of strata that you've defined above, and then you would say, in 2024, restoring 300 hectares of natural forest, and 2025, I'm not implementing that kind of activity, but doing so in 2026. And I think that should be pretty clear, and it's important to fill that in, because then the other sheets pull on this data sheet. This non-permanence sheet is pretty straightforward, and you basically put in the percentage of credits that you would be setting aside in the buffer pool. And then here we have a number of tabs for different strata. So we've only put in 5 here, but assuming that maybe you wouldn't have that many more, but if you have more than 5 strata, you would have to add additional tabs. And the way that this is structured is that you would be providing both for the baseline and for the project scenario the relevant values, and IPCC benchmark values. So as an example here, you would be looking at the above ground biomass, carbon stock in above ground biomass that is currently on the land, or that you would expect in the baseline scenario, which is in this case 10. And you're required to provide a source for that, right? So the whole point here is for IUCN to be able to determine whether those values are appropriate. And then also in the absence of the project in the baseline, if you're expecting, for example, some natural regeneration, you would have to insert here a value for the AGB growth that would happen in the absence of the project. Again, providing a reference for that. And then the same for the maximum carbon stock that you're expecting to be on the land after implementation, and then you have sort of the growth rate in the project scenario. So you have a number of different values in here that need to be filled in, and then you'll have to provide a source for the value that you are using, but you're also required to provide an IPCC benchmark value. And this is, mostly for comparison to see, whether what you're providing is roughly within IPCC range. Of course, we're aware that, IPCC values are pretty generic and might not necessarily reflect the site conditions, but it's a helpful comparison. And in the tabs at the end, we have provided the IPCC tables where those values can be looked up. And so you're required to do that for biomass and for soil as well. So basically providing baseline and project scenario values, and then that will allow the tool to calculate the removals. Then there's another section down here where you're going to have to indicate GHG emissions. This relates to the project scenario. So, for example, if you're planning to burn as part of site preparation, that would have to be indicated. The same for fertilization, for example, because that, of course, will generate GHG emissions that need to be accounted for. So you have one tab for each stratum. Finally, I guess down here you have a leakage factor, and you have an uncertainty factor as well, as any other discounts, and that will result in this table, which you cannot edit because it just calculates the removals for parameters that you've inserted above, and then it will calculate the volumes for each of the strata and result in this this summary at the end. Then at the back here, you just have various default factor tables that you can look up some of the values that are required. I think that should be the template. I think there was one more slide, James.
Yes, let me just share that. Simon, 1 second.
And from memory, I should say that that probably relates to alignment with Article 6. So yeah, here, you know, whether the government is pursuing Article 6 transactions or not, this section, and again, there's more detail in the template, is meant for you to indicate whether you have already engaged in conversations with the government, whether you've obtained any necessary approvals. If not, you're expected to outline the plans for doing so, and also list any approvals that you are aware of. And finally, we have a section on monitoring, which is a description of the monitoring system that you're expecting to put in place, and also any prior experience you have with monitoring. And I think I'll stop there and hand back to you, James.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot, Simon. So now moving on then, let me just continue. And I invite my colleague, Linda Clare. Linda is our global coordinator for the environmental and social management system at IUCN, and she's part of the multilateral finance unit. Linda, are you connected?
Yes, I'm connected. Yeah.
Please take it away. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. So in this section, we are talking about the social inclusion, which is a key theme, as James explained, for the facility. So the idea of advancing social inclusion, benefit sharing, and gender equality. James, can you move the slides? I'm just wondering whether I can move the slides or not. James?
Yes, I can do that, Linda. I just moved.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, okay, good. So the first element of social inclusion is stakeholder engagement. So in order to demonstrate how you advance social inclusion, we have provided 2 different tools to document the stakeholder engagement process you are undertaking. Maybe first on a more general note, the purpose of stakeholder engagement is generally twofold. On the one hand side, it is good practice of project design and management to enhance the project's sustainability and technical feasibility, and to ensure broad community support and ownership of stakeholders. And in the facility, we put a specific focus on local stakeholders in line with the social inclusion objective. Second, stakeholder engagement is also important with regards to safeguard and risk management. Identifying people that are potentially affected by the project, and it also helps structuring the process for engaging them in the risk assessment and in the identification of mitigation measures. So we have 2 tools that need to be completed at the concept stage. The first one is the stakeholder analysis, and these are available in the set as Annex 3, and the documentation of the consultation process, Annex 4. So the first one, the stakeholder analysis, the Annex includes a template, and you would need to complete the template. So first you prepare a list of important stakeholders, focusing in particular on local stakeholders, community organization, indigenous people, women, youth, vulnerable groups, etc., to ensure inclusiveness. And then you describe their role and main activities, but also their potential influence on the project, as well as the impact of the project on them. At the end, you would then put a scoring for importance for each of the stakeholders, and this will then guide you to decide who to involve during project design process. The second tool is the documentation of the stakeholder consultation process. So you would describe who you consulted, when issues
Linda, sorry
raised by-
for coming in. James, I think you need to move the slides. The slides are not moving. You can only see the carbon part, and there are messages.
Oh, the slides are moving on. They are moving on my side.
No, they are not on this side. There are many messages
So
on.
you can't see
Teams.
Lydia? Okay, thanks.
No, and I think all the participants can't see as well.
Okay, let me stop and then reshare 1 second, please.
We are currently waiting for James to start the slides again. So there's no presentation right now. We are waiting for the slides to appear.
My apologies, my Teams just crashed. Linda, are you still there? Are you able to share the slides from your side?
Yes, I am. I can. 1 second.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. Thank you for your patience.
Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Linda. Mine's back up and running. Can you see the slide okay now, Linda?
Yes, for some
Okay.
reason I couldn't present it either. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
so let's
Okay.
try.
So if you move to slide 35, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, or maybe first 35, the one before. So I explained the stakeholder analysis template. So the idea of this template is really to help you to decide with whom you engage during the project preparation, but also during the concept note development. So focusing in particular on local level stakeholders. So adding the stakeholders in the first column, then describing their role, how the stakeholders are influencing the project, but also how the project might influence them or might impact them. And then in the last column, you would score the importance, and based on the importance, you decide with whom you engage, in particular during the concept note development, and then later on also during the project full preparation. Next slide, please. So in the second tool is the documentation of the stakeholder consultation, which is provided in Annex 4. So here you describe who you consulted, when, what are the issues that were raised by each of the stakeholders, and also how these issues then were influencing project design or were taken up in the project design. Maybe just one final word. Important is that the stakeholder engagement is obviously an ongoing process that needs to be continued during the stage of developing the full proposal, and then equally also during the project implementation phase. And I will herewith hand it over back to James.
That's great. Thank you, Linda. Okay, apologies everyone for that short interlude, an unplanned technical glitch. Okay, so we're now moving to the fourth and final pillar of the focus of the innovation facility, which is innovation. And now you'll find this again is explained in the guidelines for applicants. And effectively what it's looking at, it's, we can't be too prescriptive, because what is innovation? Innovation can mean many different things, but it's really about pushing the boundaries. So is your project a first of its kind? Is it helping to overcome implementation barriers in the context in which you are in? Is it raising climate biodiversity impacts and contribution to the SDGs? And how is it doing? How is it raising the ambition? And in terms of MRV and data collection, there's a whole list of existing and emerging technology, digital solutions that are being used to support, actionable decision making and area-based decisions using, improved MRV data collection tools. Is your project including these? If so, please expand on that in this section, and any other innovative features that may be incorporated. That we can't list them all, so it's effectively an open space for you as project proponents to include here areas that you feel are really innovative in terms of harnessing the different technologies that may exist to increase area-based conservation, species, habitat, and then increasing carbon sequestration and storage, and increasing the engagement and benefits for local peoples and communities in and around the project site itself. So we now move to section D, so the fourth section of the concept note. And this refers to the grant budget and the project financing. The grant budget and the project financing, Simon also alluded to in his presentation on the greenhouse gas accounting template. So in the case of the grant amount, you need to just confirm what is the amount that you're requesting. It has to be between 750,000 euros and 1.5 million euros. And you will need to complete the grant budget template, which is supported document number 12 in Annex 6. I'm just cognizant of time. I am happy to go through this quickly just to share with you how it looks like. I won't go into too much detail because I think it would be beneficial to have enough space towards the end of the call to have some Q&A as well. So allow me just to share the template with you. Okay, so this is Annex 6. Effectively, you've got a nice description here. All budget needs to be submitted in euros. Additional information 2.3.1 in the grant budget in the guidelines for applicants. Please note that there is a minimum 60% of the grant budget which needs to be allocated to costs, direct costs associated with implementation of restoration actions. That includes these examples here: land preparation, seedlings, planting, etc. Please note the values that have been included are for reference only. They're not intended to represent any real life actual example. So please do make sure that you change those in accordance with what the stratum are and the true project values in your specific context in euros, please. Once you get down to the grant budget expenses section, again, it's re-highlighted that minimum 60% of the total budget should be allocated to this first restoration activity budget lines. Then we've got project preparation of the carbon project related to the PDD, any feasibility studies, surveys, including baselines, the validation, the registration costs. And we have left some blank budget lines potentially for you to complement this. Now, of course, these have to be well-founded and evidenced, but these initial budget lines we've included are supposed and intended to represent the most significant budget lines that we anticipate. But of course, if you feel that there are other categories that are not captured here, then please do include them here where you have the space to basically edit these budget lines and include additional ones. No? Then you've got the monitoring budget category, community development activities, securing project promotion, additional funding, staff costs, others such as legal, audits, and then indirect costs also. And they're the main kind of category, the main budget categories that we have. But please do make sure that when you're developing this, that you have that minimum 60% of the total budget for restoration activities. That's very important. So let's just jump back quickly to the rest of the presentation. Yes, and then that brings me to Simon. I'm not sure, Simon, did you want to share the project financing template as Annex 7? You want to just quickly run through that for the participants so you can have eyes on it?
Yeah, sure, I can. Let me quickly try to pull that up.
I'm just sharing the slide now just as a static example as well, in case.
Yeah. Yeah, and while I pull this up, so the main difference between these two, I mean, you'll see similar cost categories, which of course should be aligned, but the main difference between the two is that in the first template that James just presented is really the question around what financing are you requesting from the facility. Also, I think there was a question on match funding in the chat. There is a match funding requirement. I think at the concept stage, maybe you would be able to keep that, not have to say exactly what match funding you have for each individual line, but indicate what match funding you have. And so this Annex 7 is a broader view on project financing, so beyond what you're requesting from the facility, really an overview of, your costs across here 20 years, right? So beyond the lifetime of this grant, to see how that has been budgeted, but also your income. So your assumptions around, and this is, based on your carbon estimations, of course, how much revenue you are expecting to bring in from, in particular, removal sales over the years, and what financing you have either secured or are requiring in the form of equity or debt. And that, of course, comes back to the question that James mentioned around leveraging private finance, right? So this is a longer term financial plan, and the expectation would be that you're able to provide details that will allow IUCN to assess, really beyond the grant, how much financing are you requiring to implement the project as planned? How much of that have you secured? How much of that do you still need to secure? And then there would be a question around, well, what kind of activities are you engaging in currently, or what you engage in under this grant to actually secure the financing, which points to the longevity of the project. So that is the template. This is a little bit more flexible than the carbon template, so you can make changes here. So for example, if you have different costs for the different strata, you can include additional tables here and change the formula. And yeah, I think that's mostly it. So the main difference here is that this is the long-term financing plan.
That's great. Thanks, Simon. Then Linda, back over to you. I will share my screen so we carry on with the environmental social safeguards section. Let me know if you can see that.
I can see it, and I assume the others as well. Thank you.
Great.
So a few introductory words. Could you go to the next slide? So why the environmental and social safeguards? The innovation facility applies a systematic approach and has developed a fund-level specific environmental and social management system, ESMS. And this is to check projects on environmental and social risks and to identify ways to avoid and mitigate those risks, and both prior to project start. The purpose is obviously to avoid the risks and the adverse impacts on people as well as on biodiversity, but also to avoid future liability costs and to manage reputational risks. The different procedures of the ESMS are linked to the Innovation Facility Grant funding cycle, and I will show this in one of the upcoming slides. So the foundation of the ESMS are, on the one hand side, IUCN's own environmental and social management policy, but also KfW's sustainability guidelines and applicable standards, including the World Bank's ESS standards. And third, also the legal framework of the host country or host countries where the project is being implemented, for instance, on occupational health and safety, etc. So how does it look like? This slide, next one, James, next slide. How are the ESMS procedures and decision points linked to the grant funding cycle? In this visual, you see the yellow circled round shapes. And so we have that indicate the three main phases: the concept note development, the full proposal development, and then the project implementation. So each of these stages have different ESMS procedures and decision point. As we are focusing in this session only on the concept note preparation, so I just briefly mentioned that for the concept note development stage, the key decision point is the preliminary ESMS screening. And for then the further stages, for the full proposal development stage, there will be a full ESMS screening. This will be done collaboratively together with the proponent, which then defines the final safeguard instruments to be developed for managing the risks. And then during the implementation phase, the actual safeguard instruments will be implemented and they will be monitored. Next slide. So what does it mean, the ESMS preliminary screening? How do we do this? In the concept note template, there are a list of ESMS questions on context data, for instance, whether there's presence of indigenous people, the number of villages, etc., but also about specific risks. So you are, when completing the concept note, you are answering all these questions, and I will walk you through the questions in the following slides. Based on what you completed in the concept note, how you answer the questions, the innovation facility will conduct a preliminary screening and also, as part of this, setting a tentative risk category of the project. So it's based on the information provided about the project concept, and then pre-identified adverse environmental and social impacts and risks, but also we will look at the adherence to the ESMS topics of the exclusion list. So in the way how you're avoiding high safeguard risk issues. And it also includes a judgment about the proponent's capability and commitment to avoid and manage environmental and social risk effectively. Why do we do this already at this stage, at the concept note? Because this will allow us to exclude high-risk projects, given that these would require substantive additional funding for risk management and would expose the facility to reputational risks. So this is why we do the preliminary screening at the concept stage already. Next slide, please. So what are the questions? It starts with the question about consultation. So we would like to know whether you have already started consulting with local communities and other stakeholders, whether they have raised any concerns, how these will be addressed, etc. Next slide. Then there are a couple of questions, one about the next slide, about the social context, where you would need to describe the socioeconomic context of the project sites. You would describe the main social groups, their livelihoods, economic activities, and social issues, and also the natural resource dependency of these groups. One important section is the section about vulnerable groups, where you identify what are the key vulnerable groups in the project site, the risk, and whether there's a risk whether these issues that they are already in the context might be aggravated by project activities. And then a section where you describe the projects in terms of conflicts or post-conflict situation, organized crime, or features of violence or fragility. This is for us to judge whether the project could inadvertently exacerbate existing conflicts or generate conflicts within or between communities. And also whether there's a risk of increasing exposure of communities to security and safety risks, in particular for vulnerable groups. Next slide, please. We will also ask you to describe about the presence of indigenous people, so whether the project area overlaps with indigenous people territory or land they claim as territory, that you identify these groups and whether they self-identify themselves as indigenous. What is also important is that you describe whether the project will seek opportunities to promote indigenous people-led activities, to provide benefits to them or provide their traditional knowledge, but also risks, whether there's any risk that the project activities might affect indigenous people positive or negatively, and in that case whether a process of obtaining free, prior and informed consent has already started, or what are your plans to implement such a process. You would also need to explain whether there's a risk that the project involves restricting access to natural resources, which then might come with a negative impact of affected group on their livelihoods, what their livelihood is, and how you plan to mitigate such negative impacts. Then we have a section that is focusing on environmental risks. Next slide, please. So here you would describe whether there's any adverse impact on areas of high biodiversity value or critical habitat. And here we are obviously looking at inadvertent impact, for instance, by developing infrastructure or etc. You would also need to describe whether you plan to use non-native species and whether there's any risk of invasive species or them developing invasive character. And last but not least, also whether there's any potential adverse impact on the water cycle and the quality of water. And we also have a section about law enforcement and security risks. So you would need to describe whether there are any security arrangements in the project area, including whether there's any presence of public or private security, and whether the proposed project will require such arrangement or new arrangements for environmental law enforcement. And if yes, what is the level of diversity among security personnel, and whether these arrangements have posed or could pose potential risks for the communities. Yeah. Next slide, please. The final section is about national laws and regulation on environmental and social management and impact. So you would need to specify whether the project requires conducting an environmental and social impact assessment following national regulations or has already undergone such, or any other assessment or any procedure for environmental permitting, and then explain. And if you have already done such assessment, you need to attach those assessment reports as part of the concept note. And then in the last section, you would describe the capacity, your capacity in terms of environmental and social risk management. So first, you would describe the risk management capacity to effectively manage risk, for instance, your staffing, whether you have experts on board, whether you have specific resources, and second, also what type of risk management experience you have, whether you have worked with similar projects, what were the funding agencies, and what were the applicable safeguard standards and systems you have applied. So these are all the different questions that we are asking you to complete as part of the environmental and social management system. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. So I'll now invite my colleague, John Karuri. John is a Senior Grants Manager for our Global Program Operations Unit. John, over to you, please.
Thank you, James. I'll talk about due diligence. So as part of your application, we'll ask, you'll be required to fill in a section for due diligence. This is just, and I'll share my screen. This is how the screen will look like. My colleague James will talk more about the portal, so I wouldn't go to all the details of the portal, but you'll have a tab for due diligence, and it's a set of 7 categories of information we seek from you, mostly straightforward information. Are you registered or not, for example? And you feel some sections will require you to upload documents. So for example, registration document. If you go to the finance section, if you are audited, we would like you to upload your latest audited report and financial statements as well. And others are just about your staffing structure, just to help IUCN people evaluating the project to make an assessment of your ability to manage this project. So it's a section, please fill all of it. The assessment is based on the answers you give plus the documents you attach. So make sure wherever there is a question that requires you to attach a document that you do so, because that contributes to the assessment. I wouldn't go further into that, but Jeremy will talk more about the portal, but that's the due diligence section, and it's 7 categories, each of them with a set of questions. Pretty easy to fill, and some of them are yes or no, and some of them are just your relation. Like the last one is relationship with IUCN or conflict of interest. Yeah, so over to you, James.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, so now that is the end of the concept note. That's the final section of the concept note on due diligence financial capacity. We have, that's what John's just presented. So then there's a checklist, just so we're all clear on what needs to be submitted by when, and this is the supporting documentation, the little blue text boxes that you will have seen throughout the presentation of today, which will be shared with you all. This is all very clearly outlined also in the guidelines for applicants, but just to quickly run through, you have a total of 2 support documents that need to be submitted for Section A, filing document for all, a representation letter in the case of consortiums, the project location map, that's shapefile, which visualizes exactly where the project site is located, and then to determine also the proximity in or near a KVA. The land use change map, the minimum 10 years to ensure no deforestation has occurred in the last 10-year period, and state of the project, studies and assessments that you have existing already for the project site. In section C, the STAR report, which, as I mentioned previously, IUCN can support you in generating if you do not have access to the iVert platform and are unable to generate the report on your behalf. We would just need you to send us the lat long for each of the project locations, and we can get that sent to you as a PDF, and you'll need to submit that as a supporting documentation to the submission. Data on suitability of biodiversity monitoring system, that is optional. If it doesn't exist, that's okay. And then the greenhouse gas calculation spreadsheet, that is Annex 5. Then as Simon alluded to, if there are additional data that you may have on greenhouse gas emissions and removal, then please feel free to include them, but that is not mandatory in and of themselves. If it doesn't exist, then that's absolutely fine. The stakeholder analysis template that Linda shared with us earlier is Annex 3. That needs to be uploaded as a supporting document. The documentation stakeholder engagement that Linda also shared as Annex 4 also needs to be uploaded, and apologies for the SD8. These are not 8, these are 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So apologies for the numbering here. And the grant budget template that I just briefly shared, the project financing template that Simon shared, and then any feasibility studies, assessments, permits, etc., on environmental safeguards, environmental and social safeguards, sorry. And as I mentioned at the beginning and throughout today's second information session, all the information can be found on the Innovation Facility website, which is www.innovationfacility.org, and our contact address is innovationfacility@iucn.org as well. And all the documents can be downloaded here for reference, and I please encourage you to do so if you have not already accessed and downloaded these as well. There's been a lot of really interesting questions coming up. I've been seeing come in on the chat function and the Q&A function of today's second information session. I think as Nadia has responded to a couple of them during today's session, we will need to consolidate a large part of these and to provide responses, comprehensive responses to all of them, likely on the Q&A section of the Innovation Facility website, to ensure that everybody who is interested in the Innovation Facility has access to the answers at the same time. And that is also the reason why some of you who have written to us by email may have not got an immediate response. And the reason for that is because we want everyone to have access to the same information at the same time, for equity, and just to be fair. So before now I'd like to invite my colleague, Jeremy. Jeremy is the IUCN Grants portal manager. Jeremy, are you online? Can you hear me okay? And do you want me to share the screen, or are you happy to do so? I can see your hand raised, Jeremy, but I can't hear you. Are you able to? Okay, 1 second, that's why. Yeah, okay. Please go ahead, Jeremy.
You hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Yep. Okay,
Thanks.
very good, very good. Thank you very much, James. So yes, so I think there is a question about when the portal will be online for everyone. I guess for the same reason of equity, that's why you don't see it right now. I will demo you the portal to all of you, and there is a couple of details that I want to fix before putting it online, but that will be a matter of days maximum. James will provide you probably the information, official date for that very soon. Let me share my screen and show you how to fill in the information. I think, James, I cannot share my screen. Because I'm not in the organizer or presenters shares.
Okay, 1 second then, Jeremy. Try now, please.
Yeah. Very good. So what you will see here is actually, like, you will soon see when it's officially online these cards in the grants portal, and these cards will be the one that you will need to apply for. Well, the most important information is all the guidelines that has been discussed today will be available on the portal, and that will be the ground truth information. So if you need to refer to something, that will be the documents that makes that will be the ground truth. So I can download this information by clicking the link here, and that will then send me to there for saving the documents. Then the next thing that you can do is to apply from there. So you will be able to either log in if you are familiar with the portal, or to register as a new user. Registration is very simple. I think I will go very fast on that. But if you have any question, you can always ask us to help you on that. So I will log in with this account, and then it will ask me to agree on these applicant declarations. It's basically the form that tells that you are telling the truth about your applications and all the details in there. Once you agree, you will end up to this concept note, and then you will have all these sections to fill in. You can always, on the top right side, save your application and go back to it later. Okay, so when you're logging back, you are not forced to fill everything in one go. You can save it and fill it later. And then only when you are feeling good about the full application, you will be able to submit. Okay, so the last checklist and submission area will be where you will upload your documents, supplementary documents for all the sections, and submit. You have also the options to upload the documents directly in each individual section. Okay, and I will show you that in a second. Except for saving the application online, you can also download the application as a PDF for your own records. And then one extra information about the portal in general is that if you submit, but then a lot of required informations are not filled in, like I just created a blank application right now, it will tell me here all this red information that I need to fill in. And so it will go for each of these details and point me directly to the place where it needs to be filled in. Okay, so narrative will be the first sections, the three first sections to fill in, and will follow exactly the same as you have in the PDF documents that my colleagues just described also. With all those informations, I don't think I need to go into much more details in that. It's mostly text box, and then you will have like this upload button when you have to fill one document with a reference as supplementary document and the number of it. it goes this way. Then exactly the same thing for environmental and social safeguards. Budget is a bit special. This is where I need to fix a few details before to have you officially launch it. But the ground truth for budget will be to fill in the annexes as described in the document. Due diligence, basically that's the same ID where I will fill in the questions and answer some of the drop-down menus. And then when everything is good, I can just submit the concept notes. If you have any question about your application, mostly technical questions, but also others, you could also, you will be able here to fill in with a small information. It will give you a contact email to the person that will be able to help you on that. I think that's really like a basic overview of what it is, but it's quite straightforward. And yeah, I think that's most of the information. Over to you, James.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeremy. So just to recapitulate the concept note template that is included as Annex 2 in the guidelines for applicants, that is a PDF version used as a reference for you to understand the content which is required at this stage. And that is effectively put onto the IES and Grants portal. And as I had here on the very last slide of today's information session, is that the concept notes need to be submitted online through the IES and Grants portal. Applications will not be accepted if they're sent via email or by post. They have to all go through the Grants portal for transparency and for traceability, and that's very important. And I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, all of my colleagues, part of the Innovation Facility team, for today's second information session. I hope that it's been useful to everybody. We have 5 minutes left before the half hour. Nadia, there are so many questions that have come out today. Are there any maybe 2 or 3 questions that have come out more strongly over the last 1.5 hours that we've been connected to this information session? Any areas that we can make the best of the last 5 minutes of today's webinar before we disconnect? Go ahead, Nadia, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, cool. So thanks first. And then I think one question that came up a lot was kind of the level of information we need. So it's quite an extended concept note, right? So perhaps you can just quickly elaborate again why we asked for all of this and why it's important to already have this information at concept note stage.
Yeah, great question. Obviously, as I outlined in the early opening words of today's information session, the essence really at this phase of the innovation facility, it's a first stage. We have a very tight window of implementation, as you will have seen. Grantees will need to finalize implementation by the end of June 2027. That means that we want to be able to demonstrate some really high impact, high integrity results in a quite short time frame. That means that we were going to need to have to require some significant level of detailed information at an early stage, at this concept stage, in order for us to make informed decisions around those partners, around those projects, those proposals that are going to be able to generate those impacts in that timeline. So yes, I'm fully aware that there is an onus on a lot of information at this stage. And although it is called a concept note, it really does in many regards represent in certain areas content that you may find in a proposal. Just to be clear, once this information is consolidated and submitted as a concept note, The shortlisted applicants would be invited to develop their full proposals, which would be based very much on that information, adding data, adding more information to what has been developed at this concept note stage. And the essence really is to try and, as a highlight, just to make sure that we have the best options in terms of getting best impacts in the time that we have. But just to say also, this is phase one, no? So we have an expectation that if we can continue to grow through different partnerships as well, then we can have a database of high quality projects that potentially did not make it in the first cut in this stage of the funding window, but that we could potentially source upon to invest in new resources as they come online into the innovation facility as well. Thanks.
Okay, well, I have at least two more questions that I would like to discuss now still. So one was, there were a lot of people asking about a minimum requirement for the size of the project site. So is there a minimum hectare size or something like that?
There's no minimum stipulated, but I think in terms of the carbon, biodiversity, social benefits, they would have to be sufficiently compelling to be a strong proposal, right? So whilst there's no minimum stipulated, you would have to make an assessment as a proponent, as a consortium, as to what that benefit is you're generating. If you have 100 hectares and you're developing some really fantastic results in a short time window, but then that those results are scalable and replicable in other contexts, then that's a very compelling presentation, no? But if you're talking about, 5 to 10 hectares, then I think, unfortunately, at this stage, that's not really what the innovation facility is targeting. It's really about trying to have a transformational change to leverage private sector engagement and capital into carbon markets that have benefits that are measurable for biodiversity and for livelihoods.
Okay, and then there were a bunch of questions on the IBET STAR report. I'm not sure if you already mentioned that during the presentation now, but essentially there were questions on how they can access it, if they have to pay for it online, or if there's a way around that. Yeah.
So I mentioned that twice already during the information session. Effectively, all the participants have to do, if you do not have access to IBAT to generate your own STAR reports, you just have to send IUCN to the innovation facility at iucn.org email address, the latitude, longitude of the project site. And we will generate that STAR report on your behalf. We will then share with you the PDF that you will then have to submit as supporting documentation if you decide to proceed with the submission of concept note by the 30th of February deadline.
All right, I think I would leave all the other questions for the Q&A for now, because there are a bunch of questions still, but I think we will get back to them on our website.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see Rob and Sammy do have your hand raised. Unfortunately, we are on the half hour. We will follow up with everyone and all of the questions. And Catherine, I see your hands raised as well. But we are on the half hour at the end of our information session number 2 of 2. The deadline for submissions of concept notes is the 13th of February. If you are, we're excited to see the submissions that we'll start reviewing from the 14th of February. So I wish you all the very, very best, and thank you for your time and your energy and commitment to nature and to sustainable livelihoods moving forward. Thank you, and take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.